They will say the books are obscene, okay? There's no doubt there's language in books that I don't approve of.
Where were you? You didn't sit with us?
Where were you?
You just owned it?
We beat you here.
Okay,
I looked for you, you weren't there.
we looked for you.
Shame on y'all. Yes. Anyway, books are, there's no doubt there's books that have stuff in, them that you
I had a
like.
question for you last week, but I think Mary got yours.
You
go on that.
Hey, guys, what are you
Well,
doing here?
I only got interviewed because the library director
Inspiration
was and the assistant director was not there.
How'd you get
And
out
they
of
said
that?
they were not going to wait the next day. They said, we're going to school today.
Why is that one way?
Coming up there for a
And
while.
I was already down
I
there.
don't think
Oh,
there is.
can
I
we
think first come,
restart
first served.
section?
So it's
And so-
only the Bay Area that, well, by the park, there's no like private, anything in it. You can, I've been there. And so.
Feel the pain.
I only had to be there because I've
When we
seen
did most of the
pictures.
books, they were
A
particularly
long
good
time.
about
Yeah, a lot, you've been up there.
what we call it in the library, called young adults, teenagers.
You
And so
probably
we
see better than
moved,
you word it. We could
books
scoot
that
down.
So, the girl- is that the girl is?
sexual
Yes.
descriptions in particular.
I just seen yours for a while, so.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I had it saved in my notes back too. So you've actually asked her.
Anybody can walk in.
You're gonna break it.
I mean, you don't have to have.
I don't know who said that, but how dare you tell me like that? When I get back home and I compare, no, this way, if it's sites that make me recommendations, people who try and come sit over there can't do it, because they try and hide from the rest of the world. They sit in the divided kingdom, and that is unnecessary. How dare you avoid your brethren? Do we have to play? No, some of us had COVID, but we didn't give it to anybody except for, and Abby didn't even get it, she sat beside it.
You've got the 19-year-old.
She's got YouTube videos out there. She's got.
Yes.
Okay, the 13-year-old, you cannot get a library card in any age unless you're over.
And the other one, she used to do like through my lens.
So, you
And
know,
so I haven't watched that one.
you don't want you don't want your.
Hello,
They give you.
I know, it's, we talk a lot of watch things, but we should
My
talk
wife
about
does the
get
same.
mine,
She
but
has
they're
the same
different
strap.
recommendations, and you're like.
Anyway,
And then,
I don't know if it's a
Did you get
the
the one
thing
for
that they
Christmas?
could get us is.
I don't know where she got it.
I bet you know
The one that's the one.
She said she didn't have her keys, so I figured she's already.
It sells it by here, so
they drive a big wheel.
She's got more money in hers than I've got mine.
She can barely look at
I
it.
can't tell you.
Wait, except for we lost one. We lost a straggler over there, Harry.
Some people say that some of the.
Harry Elder, she'll get him back through my lens.
We see him having a picture.
Anyhow, how about this, you reckon we have a copy of the Koran there? Yeah.
East side of
Well,
Yellowstone,
They're looking at books, right? They also had some
All the big, falls and
We're all the buffalo.
Yes.
LGBTQ.
So we're standing, I think this time we're standing Cody Wall.
Okay.
It's about an hour
Wow.
to get to the mark, but the drive is considered like one of them.
Anyway,
top
you can wound up.
scenic drives in the United States.
We did not ban any books.
But, like Old Faithful and all that kind of stuff, is kind of on that side. But when we went first time, our children, and others were not with us, but they're gonna be this time, and they're gonna be fine. So I want to kind of get some big spots on the west side.
Yeah, well, they went up.
But we're gonna put it on the east side. I know there's a big lake over there, but I don't remember the name of it. We have
The other
to
morning.
that or-
Said you gonna talk about it when we first came here.
Oh, we're talking John Sullivan?
Yellowstone.
Yeah, I didn't
Came
realize
back
that. I looked
down.
on there, you had your back to me.
So.
And I saw Andrew, I said,
Yeah.
you turn around.
Don't have a visual at all,
Yeah.
so I can-
You weren't there when I walked by, were you? To see John?
I know that we're going to Yellowstone about 2.5 days. And then we'll spend 2.5 days with you.
Hey, I've seen John.
I was hoping that my nephew had this, like, he went to the.
Are you serious?
That's awesome. He and a couple of his friends from Free Farmland decided on a trip out there in the summer, road trip. And they went to church.
Yeah, I know you. He showed me how you have to use that all the time. don't know. Yeah, he's still a long way from skinny.
Thank y'all for coming. It's
Many, many years ago.
10 after, it's time to start, which is our traditional time to start. Everybody filters through this, there'll be a few more. We're back in Titus chapter 1 again. Thought we might finish last week, but that was wishful thinking. Cover the last half of the chapter. Talk a little bit about elders. I don't think I'm quite finished with the elders last week. And then we'll get into something else. Okay, let's start with prayer. Let's pray with me with you. Father, we're thankful for the rain that's come and for protecting us through the storms. It may yet come this week. Be with those people up in the Midwest who really struggled with it and had some severe damage, and pray you bless those families as they recover. Thankful for our time together, for your word that we can open and learn from. I pray that you'll help me to be an effective medium for sharing knowledge that you'd like this class to have. Father, help us to have a good evening in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. We talked about elder qualifications last week. The basic gist of chapter 1 is you have these, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. How you doing? Keeping pretty hardly together?
Oh, yeah.
You have elders, all right? Very first thing Paul tells Titus is you need to appoint elders in every city. And, from the history of the region, we know that probably what the early Christians were meeting in house churches, more than likely. Now, we have examples of a group up in Macedonian Paul, Lydia, that area, right? Where was that? Where the Philippian Philippi, right? Where they were meeting, some of the people were meeting out on the riverside. So, fair weather, they might meet outdoors. They didn't have church buildings. That was a fairly late development, much later. They wouldn't have met in synagogues. It probably wouldn't be allowed. Weren't a lot of public meeting places that they could use, and in areas where they were facing persecution, you wouldn't necessarily want to advertise where you're meeting anyway. So, I have this picture that the elders in a city might supervise and shepherd a variety of house churches. That's my picture of what was happening, which is a lot different than the way we do things today. But I think that there is a case to be made that leadership in many ways has to be different in different settings, in different times, different places. Not that it's different scripturally, but just different functionally. I used the example last week about the Bahamas, where I was asked to do some training to help get men ready to be elders and deacons. A very, very different situation than we have here. I wouldn't necessarily teach the same lessons here that I taught there, because they needed different things. They were in different situations. So you have this summary verse at the end of the section about elders in Titus chapter 1. It's on the board. For he, an elder, must hold firmly to the trustworthy message as it has been taught. This is kind of a summary of what Paul's trying to say. This guy's got to understand the message, and he has to understand the message as it has been taught. And I was speaking to another group recently. I think I'll put this on a slide later, but we'll talk about it then too if you want to. In Romans chapter 10, the first few verses, verse 3, the gist of that verse is that they didn't really know what God's plan for righteousness was, so they substituted their own. And I think that Paul's sort of dealing with the situation here. He's saying, you as elders need to teach the message as it was delivered to you, and not try to substitute your own. In the last part of the chapter, we're going to read about people, I think, that were substituting elements of the gospel to suit themselves and claiming it was from God, which is probably easier to do back then because they didn't have the New Testament like we do. They didn't have the assembled book like we have. They could have referred to the Hebrew Bible, the first 39 books, what we call the Old Testament, but they didn't really have these letters and gospels and things assembled. So I think we have an advantage in that. And they had to deal with a lot of things that were word of mouth. And so I can imagine that some places the gospel could be distorted, and has been. And one of these places was on the Isle of Crete where Titus was. And it says, the reason these leaders must hold firmly to this message so they can encourage others by sound doctrine and refute those who oppose it. And that's a perfect segue into the last half of the chapter where Paul is going to talk about people who are making trouble, people who were false teachers. So we'll talk about them. Now, we introduced the idea of the qualifications of an elder last week, and I'm not going to go into in depth of that because we just studied that when we studied 1 Timothy chapter 3. But I thought it was interesting. The two lists are not exactly the same. Now, in substance, they're pretty close, but there are some things that were different. So I thought, well, what were the differences? So Timothy mentions that the elders need to be sober-minded, more serious. Some people think sober in avoiding alcohol, that kind of sober, but I think it's more, they're serious-minded. They are mature men who understand their responsibilities. Timothy is also the one that has the part about being respectable and honest. Timothy has gentle, Titus doesn't. Not self-willed or stubborn, that's only in Titus. That may be, well, I get ahead of myself. Love what is good, that's only in Titus. Just, ethical, upright, only in Titus. Pious and godly, only in Titus. So my question to you is, why do you think the lists were different? Why do you think Paul would tell Timothy some things that he didn't tell Titus and vice versa? You think the differences don't matter? I mean, they're minor things or what?
When we drop off kids at school, there's 6 kids, but they're in 4 different schools. And you have high school and the middle school and the elementary school and then the junior high. And I'm telling everybody essentially the same thing every time, but I'm sure it doesn't sound, it's not the exact same words, but it's like the same message and the same meaning. I think these lists rhyme enough. He's essentially saying the general same principles.
I think you're right. I don't think they're substantively very different. I think, though, what we introduced last week about the island of Crete does give us a little insight as to why he would say just and ethical and upright.
Well, the same way the junior high is a different place than the elementary school.
Oh, junior high is the pits.
Yeah,
So,
it's the worst.
7th grade is the low point of the educational career, I'm convinced. But, you know, you're the
I've got
expert.
6th graders, and 7th graders are the worst, apparently.
I admire someone who can manage chaos the way you must be doing it.
It's crazy.
Yeah. You signed up for it. Okay. So I think maybe some of them were because Crete was in a different situation. Pious and godly, I think that's everywhere. Lovers, what is good, you know, but I think that one there where he talks about, it's translated differently, that's why I have 3 different words there, but ethical, just, and upright. Well, the Cretans were Cretans in many ways, and they were known for their dishonesty and their underhanded ways, and it was just, even today, if you wanted to insult about someone, you might call him a Cretan. Of course, that's kind of an archaic way of doing it. But the Greeks had a word for liar that comes from the word Crete, kratizo. So they, you know, which is well understood, these people had some moral problems. So maybe Paul had to emphasize that a little bit more than he would in a place like Ephesus, where maybe things were not, well, I say that Ephesus was no picnic either. A lot of paganism. So I don't know that the differences matter, but I think if they're significant at all, it's because of location. And it gives me the thought that, and something I shared a little while ago, that, you know, leadership is different in different places. And I think that leadership is more challenging in some places than it is others. I'm not speaking as an elder. Chemistry's not hard. Being an elder, isn't it, James? I've been places where the elders went through the middle. And I'm not saying that it's a walk in the park, but it's a good congregation. It's a lot of good people. It's nothing like Crete. So leadership has to be different in different situations. You agree? Don't be too shy. Something that we've done in the past, when we have time when we have appointed elders, is we not only look at the qualifications of an elder, which are there in Scripture, right there, but also look at the qualities that a man needs to have. I'm going to say this carefully. Just because a man is technically qualified to be an elder doesn't mean he has the ability to be an elder. You going to argue with me on that one, anybody? Maybe you in your own experience could give examples, but don't. I think that, a man could be the husband of one wife, but not really have leadership ability. You understand what I'm saying? So we talked about the qualities that an elder has. We have a document, I brought a copy of it, that it's been in various forms, where the first page and a quarter talks about the qualifications of an elder, and then the middle part of the second page talks the qualities of an elder. The elders in the church, in addition to meeting biblical qualifications, must also be men who understand what it means to provide faithful leadership as shepherds of the flock of the church. The duties of the elders are many according to Scripture. I'll put some of those scriptures on here in a minute. But I think it's there are qualities of an elder that go beyond the short list of qualifications. Now, of course, the qualifications are important, but there needs to be more than that going on, in my opinion. Is it possible to be qualified as an elder but not be an effective elder? I think that's part of what we've talked about. Some of the jobs that an elder has to do that aren't included in the qualifications. James chapter 5, any of you know what that one says? If you want to look up any of these, you're welcome to. James 5 says, if any of you are sick, let them call for the elders, and they'll pray over you, anoint you with oil. Okay? There's a responsibility of the elders to care for the sick. And at times, if requested, we will anoint with oil. We have some olive oil that we take. If people request it, if that's important to them, I think probably in the cultural context, olive oil was a medicine that people used. It was a cooling, a balm kind of thing. But if people, we have better products today, that's what I'm saying. But if people really feel like that would be important, then we do that. Some of our newer, Jeff thought, what did you say to me one time? Supposed to bring your own oil? And I told him 10W30 would be fine. But that's one responsibility of an elder that's not really covered in the qualifications. You see what I'm saying? What about 1 Peter 5, 1 through 3? Does somebody have that? Would read it for us? Where's that?
To the elders among you, I appeal as a fellow elder, a witness of Christ's sufferings, and one who also will share in the glory to be revealed. Be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care, serving as overseers, not because you must, but because you are willing, as God wants you to be, not greedy for money, but eager to serve, not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock.
Okay, there's a lot of stuff in there, and some of it is echoed in the qualifications in Timothy and Titus, but things like not lording it over the flock, that's not really included in the qualifications of an elder. It's something that Jesus said. The Gentiles, they have hierarchy of leadership, and probably talking about Rome and their military structure and the way their government was set up, but it's not that way in the church. We're not set up. I think in many ways, some of our elders in times past have been influenced more by corporate America or the military system. If you go to a church near a military base, a lot of the leaders in the church come from the military base, and their concept of leadership is more of a military base. Not saying that's wrong. That's just saying it'll be different. And, you know, if you are on base and you tell somebody under you to do something, they better do it. In the church, maybe not. It's a different situation. Or near, you know, sometimes corporate America has, you know, the hierarchy, the CEO and the, you know, all on down the road. Some of that has bled over into the church and the leadership structure. The church is more of a family. And you don't run a family the way you do the military, or you don't run a family the way you do a corporation. So, you know, we need to be aware of the leadership structure. And the one point I wanted to bring out of that was not lording it over the flock. Who has Hebrews 13, verse 7? Terry?
Remember your leaders who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith.
Okay, so elders are supposed to be an example. You know, I look at the other elders in the room. We're working on it, okay? But yeah, that's not in the qualifications necessarily. It's a little different. What about 1 Timothy 5:17? Anybody have that?
I'll be honest.
Okay.
The elders who direct the affairs of the church well are worthy of double honor, especially those whose work is preaching and teaching.
Okay, I think that preaching and teaching have been sort of assumed duties of an elder, but they're not really directly addressed. Well, I guess they are apt to teach, or as some people joke, just as apt not to. But you know, that's an important part of it in preaching, and there's some good elder preachers out there. So my point is, there are things. The Bible tells us a lot about how to be an effective leader, and not all of it's included in the qualifications. Now, the second part of the chapter has to do with people who were causing trouble, basically. And that starts in verse 10. He says, "For there were many who were insubordinate, empty talkers, and deceivers, especially those of the circumcision party, the Jewish Christians who were teaching you can only become a Christian if you become a Jew first. They must be silenced, since they are upsetting whole families by teaching for shameful gain what they ought not to teach. One of the Cretans, a prophet of their own, history tells us it's Epimenides, if that name means anything to you, said, 'Cretans are always liars, evil beasts, lazy gluttons, and this testimony is true. Therefore, rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith.'" He's giving Titus a pretty big job right there. "Not devoting themselves to Jewish myths and the commands of people who turn away from the truth." Let's just stop there and talk about that for a while. So he's talking about what true leaders should be doing, and then what these people should not be doing. He calls them rebellious, especially those of the circumcision group. And I thought that was an interesting word to use. He also calls them, one version says insubordinate, which gives me the idea that these were people who were in the church. Because you wouldn't necessarily say that people outside the church were insubordinate. But what do you think causes a person to become rebellious? What do you think is at the heart of rebellion in the church?
Not wanting to follow.
Not yet.
Not wanting to follow.
Not wanting to follow.
Fear.
Fear? Fear of what?
I think a lot of the time it's fear of being controlled.
Okay. Would it be safe to say there are people that don't want to be controlled because they want to control?
Potentially. I think that humans are far too complex for us to say that there is any one reason to which an individual would be rebellious.
Okay.
I think a lot of the time when people are rebellious, they don't have a complete understanding of what, and you said specifically, like within the church. So that would lead me to believe that they don't have a firm understanding. And I think a lot of the times, and yes, potentially people don't want to be controlled because they want to control. But that kind of, in my mind, as someone who works with people a lot, the need to control is typically out of fear. a compulsion that if I don't have this within my grasp, then I am vulnerable.
Okay. Now, these members of the circumcision party, I think we can probably identify some fears of theirs
Indeed.
that might contribute to that. They were afraid that they were going to lose what their people had followed for thousands of years.
That would be scary.
Yeah.
Reasonably so.
Yeah.
But a true fear, or more of a stubbornness, like, this is how it's always been, and why are they trying to change it? I don't understand.
If somebody were to come in here to our church and say, David, sit down, I want to tell you why what you're teaching these people is wrong, wouldn't we be afraid for somebody to challenge our ideas like that and say, we've been doing this our whole lives, you can't march in here and say that we're wrong? We wouldn't just take that lying down. We would feel infiltrated.
Yep. Okay.
It would be scary.
But that would go back to a lack of faith.
Say again, Gabe?
That would go back to a lack of faith. We don't have enough faith. If you gotta have faith, you'll be scared.
Okay. Yeah, I can go with you there. Probably there's a faith problem, a stubbornness problem. I think at the root of it maybe is there's something about the way things are that they don't like. Would you say that's probably true?
Well, and if cretins are customs or liars, perhaps they just have a mistrust of the leadership in the past. Hard to,
What would it like to be live in a country where you just automatically assume that all your political leaders were lying?
we have a growing mistrust of leadership in this country.
I think, yeah, some mistrust of leadership. The church I grew up with in Illinois, there was one gentleman, we didn't have elders, we didn't have deacons, we were just too small and too new. But he really wanted to run things. And he caused a lot of problems. And because he thought there's a small group getting started, they need leadership, and I was just a kid, and I knew enough about it to know that here's a situation that's very destructive. And this little bit of church asked this guy to leave because he was being rebellious, I guess.
David, rebellious is just one of the words that's used. Meaningless talk and deception.
Yeah.
I mean, there's some, to me, deception, that's a deep one.
Meaningless talk, I'm not sure what that is, do you? But deception, yeah, there's these people were not just complaining about the leadership, they were teaching their own way of doing things, right? And we know a little bit about it because of what we read elsewhere, that they were teaching that to become a Christian, you had to become a Jew first, so all the Gentile converts needed to come in through the Jewish door, keep kosher, be circumcised, keep the law, and then you could become a Christian. Paul was very, very upset with these people. And what was happening, as I understand it, when Paul's travels, he'd go to a city and teach, and when he left, these guys would come in behind him and say, well, now what Paul told you was good, he didn't go far enough. You know, that Paul had some problems. And so they would undermine what he was doing, and it really made him angry. Some of the harshest words in Galatians chapter 5 that he ever writes are in there about what he thinks should happen with these people. Read it. Read it in a liberal translation, a new translation. It's very, okay.
What is this dishonest gain? Is this monetary? Like, it was also in Timothy, not trying to get gain, and that for the sake of dishonest gain.
Well, I think I've got a few points about that. Dishonest gain. What was the source of it? One guy said maybe they were connecting salvation with money. You know, if you give me money, I will tell you how to be saved. I know the real story. But I need support. I don't know. Some people were saying maybe they were peddling the gospel. That phrase is used elsewhere. 2 Corinthians 2:17. Paul talks about people who are peddling the gospel. It could be that they were trying to convince people to support them financially. you know. People supported Jesus in his ministry. People supported Paul when he traveled around. So why not you support me? Because I've got the real story. So there's some level of gain, and dishonest gain just means they weren't working for it, right? Like Paul would come to an area and he would work as a tent maker to support himself many times. There are a few examples of that. Maybe these guys weren't doing that. They were just trying to live off of people's generosity, you know, going and staying in their house, that sort of thing. But there are problems. There are problems. If you read the section what Terry wrote, meaningless talk and deception, if you skip down to verse 14, I think there's a connection to what Paul says there. Not devoting themselves to Jewish myths and commands of people to turn away from the truth. Okay, so not only were these people deceptive, but they were also getting wrapped up in what's called Jewish myths. And so I thought, what's a Jewish myth? I've read a few things about Jewish myths, but some of them are kind of off the wall. You know, in the Old Testament, you have a lot of people mentioned, like in the genealogies. Well, over the years, they had developed stories for all those people. Not only do we have this guy who begat so-and-so, but that guy has an entire history that they wrote. Okay, that's one source of the Jewish myths. They embellished some of the stories of the Old Testament. Let's see, I had a note here I was going to share. Yeah. Here are some of the rabbinic traditions in the Talmud, which is basically the commentaries on the Old Testament that they had written. So these were writings of men. One of the things they taught was the dust of the first man. Adam was made from dust, right? But it was gathered from all over the earth because of Psalm 139 verse 16 says, God saw the unformed substance. And Zechariah 4:10 says, the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth. So they thought God had gotten a little dust from everywhere. Seems like a harmless myth, but sort of shows how far off they could go. Why did Obadiah hide 50 prophets in a cave? 1 Kings 18, because the cave would only hold 50. We don't know that, but they knew it. They said the first man had two faces, because Psalm 139:5 says, you have formed me behind and before. And they thought that meant that Adam had two faces. They thought that God says his prayers because in Isaiah 56 verse 7 it says, my house, God's house, would be a house of prayer. So they thought that meant God prayed. And Michael is greater than Gabriel because he reached his goal in one flight, this Daniel 10 and verse 13, while Gabriel took two flights. In Daniel 9:21, the word fly occurs twice. So they sort of embellished stories in the Old Testament. They put a lot of things in that were not necessarily there. One gentleman said that he thought it might have something to do with the Gentiles. And Peter, when it came up from Galatians 2, those of the circumcision contended with him, saying, you went into uncircumcised men and ate with them. But you read through the law, there is never a law that says Jews can't eat with Gentiles. There's not a law. But that was a tradition, something written in the Talmud, the oral law. The oral law contains, as this guy says, the oral law contains the commandments of men. Another one that was not in the law, but it was greatly enforced, was the way the Pharisees would wash their hands before eating, which was not for hygiene. They had a ceremony of pouring water over the top of the hands, sort of a symbolic cleansing of the hands. But that was not in the Old Testament anywhere. It's something that was added. So I think that some of these things that Paul's talking about is they were getting sidetracked and distracted by things that were not revealed by God, which they added in, and it caused them to get off track. Yeah.
With the
Was that some of the full of meaningless talk, maybe that he was referring to?
But that's why I was trying to tie those two verses together. The meaningless talk and the Jewish myths, I think, are part of the same problem. And then what he says in 14 was interesting. Devoting themselves to Jewish myths and the commands of people who turn away from the truth. Now, he must be referring to the false teachers. And they're turning aside to what these guys are teaching rather than, I guess, what the elders were teaching, because they were being given the job of teaching sound doctrine. So not only the Jewish myths, but they were also being distracted by these guys who were teaching something that may have been something that wasn't in the Bible at all. And the main thrust is the Judaizing. You got to become a Jew first before you can become a Christian. Any thoughts of y'all? I mean, I'm just plodding along.
He gave the same instructions in First Timothy, told Timothy about those that want to do this and meaningless talk and endless genealogies.
Yeah. Oh yeah, genealogies. Not only did they make up stories about those names they came across, but then each one of those people had a whole genealogy they had made up. It sounds like Gnosticism, but that doesn't come around for another 60, 70 years or so, but maybe an early version of that, where they got really sidetracked with genealogies. Of course, the Jews were very much into genealogies anyway, because they had to prove their own purity of, their own family line. So they did a lot of genealogies of their own families. And he says they must be silenced. Okay, just think for me, how would Timothy do that? How would you think, maybe he's younger than most of the people there, and you got these people causing trouble. How do you silence people? Shh. I was looking at you.
If there's,
Shout them down.
is he silencing them from saying things that are incorrect, you would challenge it from the correct standpoint and
Debate with them.
well, tell them why what they're saying is not correct.
Okay. Confront.
I think that's, I don't know if you confront them or you talk to somebody, so that it gets to them. I don't know that you have to go, I think you could go straight to the person. I don't, it's in love and all that, but basically I understand you're saying this, Dave, and I don't agree with that. And my understanding of it from what Jesus explained to us was this and this, and what you're saying has no part in it. You don't go tell them how dumb they are and that kind of thing. You silence them with an education.
I thought it might be Facebook posts that got the job done.
Yeah, that would work.
I've heard that somewhere.
Yeah. Well, let's think about what we said earlier about a set of elders, and they're over all the house churches in a city. So my thinking is that the elders were charged with the teaching. And so I'm just filling in some blanks. But if you had a house church, maybe they floated among them and they did the teaching. And so you have sort of a forum. If the elders know what they're supposed to be teaching and they're doing some teaching, Titus is the evangelist, but maybe he floated around. I'm not sure. Some way of getting teaching to these house churches might be a way of silencing it, because the only way you can silence falsehood is with truth and getting people to see the truth, right? You can point them in the right direction. And so I asked the question, how do we do that? How would we silence someone today who was teaching something that we didn't think is right? Would it be different than what Titus was supposed to do? Call him into an elders meeting?
How did your church handle the difficult number when you were younger?
Well, I was a kid.
You may not have been privy to it.
Yeah, when you don't have appointed leadership, you sort of get the men of the congregation, they wrote him a letter. Well, he wasn't welcome anymore because of what he was teaching.
And he left? He left?
Yes, his family did too. small church. My parents and 4 or 5 other families started this church in a little town in Illinois. It's because they got upset at the church they attended in East Peoria. They fired the preacher, these people didn't like it, started a new church. Not an unfamiliar story. But a brand new church meeting in a basement of a Masonic lodge, renting a place. It was a fragile time for them, and somebody like this guy could have been the end of the church. So I think they did right, standing up to him. I couldn't tell you what he was teaching, except that he wanted to be in charge. That's the main thing I remember. Same thing was going on with John wrote to 2nd John, talking about Diotrephes, who loved to have the preeminence. How much trouble that caused. And I think that's another good argument for why we have more than one elder. We don't have a preeminent elder. We don't have a head elder, right? Do we? I don't know if you know how we're organized, but we have a team of 5 of us of the 14. I say 14, of course, Ken Bradford's is sort of on a hiatus till he gets better. But there are 5 of us that sort of rotate the administrative duties, which can be a lot of things to handle, but some things don't need to go to the whole eldership. They can be dealt with on an administrative level. So we sort of handle it that way. Any questions? Okay. Any answers? Let's start reading where we left off. Verse 15. To the pure, all things are pure, but to the defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure. Both their minds and their consciences are defiled. They profess to know God, but they deny him by their works. They are detestable, disobedient, unfit for any good work. I asked Donna this, and we're discussing it at home, so I'll ask you all too. What does it mean? To the pure, all things are pure? What do you think he's trying to say? Because I don't know. I'm not sure. So we scratch our heads together as a class.
I think it means if you are genuine.
You're what?
Genuine.
Genuine? Okay. All right.
I wonder about it, pure, everything is pure, so everyone they come in contact with, they see them as good. It doesn't mean everything they do is good, but they see them as good.
Okay.
Pure sees pure.
Right. If you are a good person, maybe you tend to see the good in others.
Yeah.
Whereas people who lie, cheat, and steal tend to see the worst in others. You agree with that, anybody? Everybody? Nobody?
The Message paraphrases it as everything is clean to the clean-minded, but nothing is clean to dirty-minded unbelievers.
Dirty-minded, okay. That brings up all kinds of images. I think there is this idea that your mindset, are you the kind of person who sees good in the world around you, or do you all see the bad? When you watch the news, how do you feel after you watch the news when you've heard nothing but bad news? And I don't know. It's difficult to isolate yourself from the bad. But I think there is an idea of thinking the best of people. To the pure, then you see the purity in others. Nobody's pure. Nobody's perfect. I don't think Paul is saying that. But I think he is saying there's a way of looking at the world that causes you to see the good in other people. Because you can get real cynical real fast. I'm telling you, I had to deal with the benevolence program in Knoxville, the church we worked at, and it was, I got so frustrated being lied to. And it just bothered me that people would come to a church and think the only way they could get the church to help them was to lie to it. That just bugged me. So I got cynical. I got over it, but I was very cynical about helping people.
This commentary verse says, to Christians who have been purified by the atoning death of Christ, everything God created is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving.
Okay? This guy says, a person, I didn't write down who said this, a person with a heart transformed by faith and focused on God views life through a lens of love and integrity. That's what we're talking about, perspective, seeing things through the lens. Finding purity in legitimate everyday pleasures. If that's that guy, what is the opposite viewpoint? Where he says, there are other people that nothing is pure. But to the defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure.
I dealt with people in a career where I dealt with management a lot as a union representative. If you were a craft employee and made it to management, and you had been somebody that rode the clock and stole, you thought all of your employees were the same way, because that's the way you were. And that was the hardest type of manager to deal with. They viewed everybody as out.
They think everybody's as corrupt as they are.
Exactly.
Okay. Other thoughts? You've heard from the far left corner about the far right.
The back 40.
Huh?
The back 40.
Back 40? The rowdy section.
I don't know, there's some part of this that I feel like there's a lot of practice to. And I think, like what you said, it is very easy to get cynical. And especially now, with like the amount of things that are thrown in front of us during the day. But I find it really, really fascinating, because I've had the privilege to visit with Mary Nell a lot in the past week since she's been in the hospital. And it really made me think, as you were talking, you know, somebody who has had like a serious health issue come up like that, broken bones, you know, you would think you would find really downtrodden people with, you know, difficult things to say. I don't think I have heard her complain once. And the only thing that she talks about is how she's made it her mission at the retirement home.
Yeah.
That all of the people, which I know because I work with people who are in a very bad, nothing is okay kind of mood about, oh, I'm here and my life is horrible, my life is over, and not yet. She's making it like her mission to be like, you can think about that better. And she was sitting there telling me, like the day after her hip surgery, laid up in a hospital, she's like, but you know what? I've been working on this one for a month and it's starting to work. They're starting to turn around. And so, I mean, I'm not saying it's always just that easy, but I do think that there's a certain amount of like practice, and doesn't have to be hopeless.
A lot of how you enjoy life depends on what glasses you put on in the morning. And I know when I've been in a bad mood, everything looks dark. But, you know, we can choose a different pair of glasses, right? He says those who are defiled and unbelieving, he says those are the people for whom nothing is pure, the defiled and unbelieving. And I think that ties us into our discussion of faith. If you really have faith in Jesus, then you're going to see things differently in the world than people who don't. I think there's a given. We look at life through a different lens than people who don't believe in Jesus. Wouldn't you agree? Mm-hmm. I think it flavors everything. If it doesn't flavor your entire life, you're probably not doing it right. You know, I told somebody if being married is not the hardest thing you've ever done, then you're not doing it right. I think it is. It has a lot to do with the viewpoint that we decide, and I think we can control that. Everything good and improper can be morphed into something sinful and sordid. We could give tons of examples of that. This guy said Paul was refuting the false teachings of these legalists with reference to foods. Now this is a different thought from me, the pure, the defiled foods. Kosher, they were teaching that the dietary laws still applied to Christian believers. That's possible. I'm not sure I agree with that entirely, but I thought it was a different perspective. When they talked about pure and defiled, a lot of times they were talking about food in the Jewish culture. Now this phrase that gets there toward the end, we got about 4 minutes left. They profess to know God but deny him by their works. You know, how do you, obviously there were people that description was very applicable to in the first century. How do we see that working out today? People who profess to know God but deny him by their works. What's that person like?
Kind of had a growing feeling that I keep struggling with because as I look at Satan has always been working in corrupting people's minds, and there's that phrase that they'll call evil good and good evil. I keep seeing Satan really working and people being corrupted through Satan's lies and deceit, and then I remember the other verse of our struggle is not against flesh and blood, and it's like it's so hard not to look at people who've been corrupted by Satan and Satan's lies that are being tools, and you see him use some pretty strong language there at the end of that verse of they're evildoers, they can't do anything good. He speaks pretty bad about these people. And it's hard not to project that frustration, that anger that I feel towards Satan, and to separate it from the individual, and to not see them as an enemy because they're corrupting the church. They're tearing it apart. They're leading it astray and seeing this spiritual battle just being waged against the church of people I love. It's really hard not to become angry.
Yeah, I think you have to realize that these people that cause trouble in the church are just people. They're just people, but they're being controlled by Satan, many of them, and they're like prisoners. And we should help free the prisoners rather than line them up and shoot them.
That's one way to silence them, but I'm not advocating that.
So what would I have to do if I profess to know God? What would I have to do to deny him by what I do? What is something I could do that would show that I deny the fact that I know God? Okay, we say sin, right? But specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean to specifically think of people, but of course I specifically think of people.
No names.
You know what I mean? But yeah, I mean, I know people who claim to be, Christian or believe in God or whatever, but they're hateful and mean and all this kind of stuff. And I don't know if that's necessarily a sin, but I don't think it's necessarily uncommon either to say, I believe in God and then just keep doing whatever it is you might do. I've been thinking about this a lot because of James chapter 2, where it says, faith without works is dead.
Right.
And it's well, okay, if you say you love somebody and then you go punch them in the face, okay, do you actually love them? I guess.
If you're in the first grade, you might do that.
If you're an adult.
Well, what TJ was saying Sunday about generosity, it hit me that, if I profess to know God, but then I'm tight-fisted and stingy and miserly, aren't I not saying I don't know God? Because God is a giver. God is generous. I think there's a lot of things that we can put on one side of that You know, okay, you know God, but then you're doing this, which is, you know God is loving, wants everybody to come, but yet you won't let the Gentiles in. You know, you see, there's actions that they could do that showed that they didn't really know God. And back to the verse I quoted earlier from Romans 10, verse 3, he says he was talking about the Jews. He said these are people who had a zeal for God, but they didn't have the proper knowledge. And he goes on and says, and since they don't know God and God's plan for righteousness, they substituted their own. It seems to me that's been the source of a lot of religious problems over the years, is that we weren't sure exactly what God wanted, but we made up our own deal, all right? I'm not pointing any fingers. Now, we just have a second or two. I wanted to go through this and talk about just read this list to you, because I think there's some takeaways that I want everybody to get from this chapter. Number one, some churches' situations are tougher than others, okay? Leadership is important, but also the character of the leaders is important. One of the jobs of a leader is to teach what is right and oppose those who teach wrong. That's a big point in this chapter. Professing to know God is not enough. And it's possible to desire to do good, but by one's life be unqualified to do it. The very last verse of chapter 1, he talks about these people, they're detestable, the disobedient, unfit for any good work. I mean, they're not even a good church volunteer, because they sort of just disqualified themselves, is what in Paul's mind. Okay, we're over time. Chapter 2 next week. We'll see how far we get. Glenn is still out of town. He's in Nicaragua right now. He's going to be out of town next week too, so you got me 3 weeks in a row to deal with it.
I don't know. Hey, Donna. Hey, Donna. Donna. David said you had the same phone as you have. I do. I wish mine was over.
Did y'all really eat here?
Yeah.
When I came in, I walked around the whole room. Because, you know, it's a ranch.
Yeah.
So I walked around the whole room.
I said, Jason, where's that? And I was like, how it's perfect. It's a little bit bigger. Thank you. So I got, he said, oh, you got that same person. I can't believe I'm finding other places. Did you have a good birthday? I'll try. Do something fun? Really bad. I'm on the Thank you. What did y'all cook? We just showed up and said, I can peel one potato. We said, here we are after a long day's work. Well, stir something. I did have to shred the chicken because Abby won't shred anything.
That's not true. I don't like it.
She's like, yeah, we'll do it.
I don't enjoy it.
But it's okay because Abby does everything else in the kitchen 18 and a half times better than me. Yeah, you're welcome. We would starve to death. We would starve to death if it wasn't for Abby. She would chicken. Yeah, she would feed me whole chicken. Birthdays too. Actually, she would feed me chicken at all. She doesn't even like it.
I'm not a huge chicken fruit. I buy it all the time because it's on sale.
Yeah, she makes whatever is on sale. That's what Abby's cooking that week. Well, that's kind of what I do. Like I cook Sunday lunch for the kids and grandkids.
Yeah.
But I just cook whatever is on sale.
Yeah. Like chicken drumsticks, $4 at Aldi.
Whatever's on sale, we're gonna have. So.
Where do you go?
Kroger most of the time. Kroger, but we stay away from the Kroger. We look at Kroger and we go, we're leaving. We're going to Aldi. I shop what's like coupons, the digital coupons, and then whatever coupons I've got. That's how I shop at Kroger. Yes, when chicken goes on sale, isn't it? I like Aldi's. I usually go get all I can get at Aldi, and then sometimes I can't get, then I'll get. That's the move.
Right. That's what
I'll buy chicken that's on sale, put in the freezer, you know, like if it's a good.
We had a real good grocery shopping experience. And we flew into Midland, go down to the airport. So before I was here, I did Walmart. I placed the order, so we got a plane, got the rental car.
got your groceries?
Walmart right next in 5 minutes, we were good to go.
Fran, if we go to the mountains, Fran has done that and placed an order and picks it up and waits, before we all go to the mountains all the time. It's like she's done that before. We did this last time. Time for that, Fran had already got the order together, and at least we had enough to get started on, when we first got there, so.
My birthday yesterday, Jonathan Instacarted me 2 houseplant